The first message template I want to cover is a three-parter, and it has a spot for your basic science, what is broadly known in your field or the topic that you're tackling, what your chief finding is from a new scientific paper or a new research project, and what implication that research result, that finding has for whatever audience you're talking about. It could be people who are using your science, policymakers who are using it to drive a decision. It could be an implication for other scientists. It could be an implication for funders when they're thinking about priorities for other scientific projects. So you'll see how modular this is. I'll show you two examples. We'll go in depth on an HIV/AIDS one that I worked on with some public health researchers when I did a workshop with them. And I'll show you one that's a little bit more tech focused and straightforward. And this is all derived from a scientist guide to working with the media by the Union of Concerned Scientists. This is the HIV/AIDS study, and it starts with the basic science, what is known, right? Why are we studying this problem? The Caribbean has the second highest rate of HIV in the world, and it's the leading cause of death for people aged 20 to 59. The finding of this research paper was that tourism areas combine a number of risk factors, including drug use, sex work, and population mixing. And the implication was that this finding can inform where policymakers target HIV interventions. So as far as public health studies go, this is pretty straightforward. It was fairly easy to zoom in on what the main messages were. And then we spent some time thinking about, okay, well, how would you translate that into sound bites? So this basic science about the prevalence, well, we imagine, well, what if we're talking to a US audience? How do we help them ascribe meaning to the idea that the Caribbean has the second highest rate of HIV in the world? We looked at some statistics. And it turns out that the Caribbean has twice as many people living with HIV/AIDS as California. People know that California is big, right? So this might be a useful lens that you could use to communicate the prevalence of HIV/AIDS in the Caribbean to a US audience, to a California audience. You might take the HIV prevalence rate at a local area if you're giving a talk about this, if you're talking to somebody and you know where they're from, you might translate it that way, right? Whatever you think that local problem is, here's where the Caribbean stands compared to that. The finding here, this was in, sort of standard scientific language, right? Tourism areas combine a number of risk factors. That term risk factors is pretty general. So we flipped this around a little bit, and we said that HIV thrives where drugs, sex work, and people come together. That's in major tourism areas. So in flipping that and getting rid of that little risk factor jargon, we just made this sentence these two sentences have a little bit more impact and put that finding in a way that helps the audience kind of discover, oh yeah, tourism areas, that makes a lot of sense, right? The implication, this finding can inform where policymakers target HIV interventions. We used a cliche. We said policymakers can recognize that tourism hotspots are HIV hotspots too. And that one just came to us as we were chatting around this because it's so obvious if you work in public health, the idea of a hotspot, a place where a disease is breaking out, that's jargon that's kind of gone into the mainstream, right? There was that book and movie, The Hot Zone, right? It's something that we talk about quite a bit, and it also pops up in tourism, right? So it's just taking advantage of the fact that those two phrases are used in these very different contexts to make just a short soundbite. Here's a more tech-focused piece of research that fits into this same template. We didn't take the additional step of translating this into sound bites, but I'll just read through this briefly. The basic science for this new tech advancement is that hard-to-predict solar storms can release radiation that hits Earth and the satellites we have in orbit. The major findings of the new research are that new modeling techniques can better calculate the time between events on the sun and the arrival of radiation here on Earth. The implication for scientists or societies is that when a solar storm occurs, satellite operators will now have more time to protect the communications network everyone relies on, such as the global positioning system. This is the sort of thing that's the bread and butter of a lot of technical scientific work. Something like that, as long as you can relate it back to what that value is for the rest of society, something else that everyone's using that we might take for granted every day, even what the implication is for other scientists who are then doing something that connects back to society in some way or to your public audience in some way. This is a really good template for helping you zoom in on that.